Hey guys, have you ever wondered who actually wrote the words that wooed queens and seduced knights when most of the population couldn't even write their own names? Before we start, likes and subscribes help me keep making these. Where are you listening from? Drop your city and time in the comments. I'm always reading them, thinking, wait, people in the States listen to history stories to sleep. Okay, tonight we are talking about why medieval monks wrote love letters for other people. But before we go anywhere, get cozy. Pillows? Good. Blanket situation handled? Perfect. Trust me on this one. Let's fade out the blue light of the screen and the hum of the refrigerator. Let's replace the street lights outside your window with the heavy, suffocating darkness of the 12th century. It's not a scary darkness though, it's a quiet one. It's the kind of darkness that feels like a thick wool blanket pulled right up to your chin. You are standing in a stone corridor. It's cold here, a damp, permeating chill that seems to seep out of the limestone walls themselves, smelling faintly of wet earth and old incense. You walk forward. The stone floor is uneven beneath your feet, worn smooth by generations of leather sandals, shuffling back and forth in silent contemplation. To your left, a heavy oak door stands slightly ajar. A sliver of warm, golden light spills out, cutting across the shadows like a blade. You can hear something inside. It's not chanting, and it's not the solemn murmur of prayer. It's a scratching sound. Scritch, scritch, dip, scritch, scritch, dip. It sounds like a bird trapped in a cupboard, or perhaps a very large beetle navigating a dry leaf. You push the door open and slip inside. The room in the scriptorium is surprisingly crowded, yet almost entirely silent. The air here is thick and warm, heated by the collective breath of 30 men and the heat of tallow candles. It smells of animal skin, iron, gall, ink, and unwashed wool. You find a spot in the corner, leaning back against a wooden pillar that has likely been holding up the ceiling since before your great-great-grandparents were born. You watch. Rows of desks, angled steeply like lecterns, are filled with monks. They are hunched over, their spines curved into question marks, their noses dangerously close to the parchment. This is the engine room of the medieval intellect. But if you lean in closer to the man nearest you, let's call him Brother Thomas, you'll notice something odd. Thomas is a severe-looking man. He has a face that looks like it was carved out of a turnip and left in the sun too long. He looks like he hasn't smiled since the First Crusade. You watch his hand move. It's stained black at the fingertips. The ink settled deep into the ridges of his fingerprints. He dips his quill, shakes off the excess with a practiced flick that sends a microscopic spray of black droplets onto the floor, and continues writing. You peer over his shoulder. You expect to see Latin prayers. You expect to see a transcription of St. Augustine, or perhaps a very dry inventory of the monastery's sheep population. But that's not what Brother Thomas is writing. The script is elegant, looped and sharp. Gothic textualis that looks like a picket fence made of knives. And the words, "My heart is a burning ember in the ash of your absence," he writes. He pauses, scratches his tonsure, looks up at the ceiling with a look of utter boredom, and then dips the pen again. "I languish," he writes, "like a deer thirsting for the stream. Only the stream is your bosom." He sighs, a long, weary exhale through his nose. It is the sigh of a man who is essentially performing data entry, except the data is someone else's romantic desperation. This is the great irony you've stumbled into. Here is a man who has sworn a vow of celibacy, a man who has technically renounced the pleasures of the flesh, and he is currently the ghostwriter for a local baron who wants to impress a merchant's daughter but doesn't know how to hold a pen without snapping it. You look around the room. It's not just Thomas. Several of these men are engaged in the same task. They are the medieval equivalent of a text message autocorrect, taking the grunted, inarticulate desires of the illiterate aristocracy and turning them into high art. It's funny, isn't it, to imagine that the most romantic words in history, the lines that launched affairs and ended marriages, were likely drafted by a guy who was mostly thinking about how much his back hurt and whether there would be turnips again for dinner. You shift your weight against the pillar. The wood is hard, but the atmosphere is hypnotic. The rhythmic scratching of 30 quills creates a kind of white noise, a texture of sound that feels like rain falling on a tent. It's steady, reliable. You watch a dust mote float through the halo of a candle flame. It dances in the heat, rising and falling, before disappearing into the shadows of the vaulted ceiling. Let's take a closer look at the tools of the trade here, because the romance of the letter is significantly undercut by the reality of the materials. Brother Thomas pauses to sharpen his quill. He pulls a small knife from his belt, a pen knife, literally, and slices the tip of the goose feather. You can see the resistance in the quill. It's not a soft thing. It's keratin, tough and springy. He has to cut it at just the right angle to hold the ink. If he cuts it too steeply, the ink blots, too shallow, and the line is scratchy and thin. He tests the nib on a scrap piece of vellum. It scratches loudly. He frowns, slices again, and tests it better. Now look at the surface he's writing on. It's not paper. Paper is a luxury from the East, rare and flimsy. This is parchment. Specifically, it looks like sheepskin. If you were to run your fingers over it, which you shouldn't, because the oil from your hands would ruin the surface, and Brother Thomas would likely hit you with a ruler, you would feel the difference between the two sides. There is the flesh side, which is smooth and pale, almost creamy in texture. And then there is the hair side, which is slightly rougher, darker, where the follicles used to be. Writing a love letter on the skin of a dead sheep adds a certain weight to the sentiment, doesn't it? It's durable. This letter is meant to last. It's not a text that disappears when you close the app. This is a physical object, heavy and textured. When the recipient holds this letter, they will be holding something that required the death of an animal, the labor of a tanner, the preparation of a scraper, and the headache of a monk. It is a high-stakes object, and the ink. Look at the inkwell sitting precariously on the slanted desk. It's a small horn, plugged with a bit of cork. The liquid inside is black, but if you look closely at the dried rim, it has a purple-ish rusty sheen. This is iron gall ink. It's made from oak galls, those weird round growths you find on oak trees, which are actually caused by wasps laying eggs in the bark. The monks crush these wasp nests, mix them with water or wine, and add iron salts. The result is a chemical reaction that bites into the parchment. It doesn't just sit on top, it burns itself in. It's acidic. Over centuries, the ink can actually eat right through the page, leaving lace-like holes where the words used to be. There is something poetic about that, isn't there? A love letter written in acid that eventually destroys the very medium it's written on. It's a bit dramatic, but then again, so is the Baron who commissioned it. You watch Brother Thomas dip the quill again. He is struggling with a specific phrase. The client presumably wants to say something along the lines of, "I think you are very pretty, and I would like to see you, but you can't write that. That's peasant talk. That's not courtly love." So Thomas stares at the candle, his eyes unfocused. He's accessing his mental database of the ars dictaminis, the art of letter writing. This was an actual subject taught in schools and monasteries. There were manuals for this, templates. Imagine a medieval version of ChatGPT. But instead of a server farm, it's a tired man in a wool robe, mentally scrolling through a list of approved metaphors for female beauty. He decides on a classic. He writes, "Your eyes are like the stars that guide the mariner through the tempest." He stops. He looks at the sentence. He gives a tiny, almost imperceptible shrug. It's a cliché, sure. He's probably written that exact sentence 4 times this week for 3 different nights. But it works. It gets the job done. He sands the wet ink to dry it, blowing gently across the page. The breath clouds in the cold air. The candle flickers. A draft has found its way into the scriptorium, whistling through the chinks in the stone. You pull your metaphorical cloak tighter around you. It's easy to romanticize the past, to imagine it as a series of oil paintings. But standing here, watching Thomas rob a cramp out of his writing hand, you realize it's just a job. It's 11 p.m. on a Tuesday in 1150 AD, and he just wants to finish this letter so he can go to sleep. But he can't, because there is a stack of wax tablets next to him, notes scrawled in rough shorthand, waiting to be transcribed into elegant prose. The world is full of illiterate lovers, and Brother Thomas is the only Wi-Fi signal in town. You step closer to the desk, looking at the stack of tablets. The next one isn't a love letter. It looks like a legal dispute about a cow. You adjust your posture against the pillar, trying to find a comfortable spot on the unforgiving wood, but you settle for just being quiet. The silence in here is heavy. It's not an empty silence, it's a dense, pressurized quiet, like the air inside a library that's deep underground. The only punctuation to the silence is the sound of friction. Quill on skin, skin on wood, wool on stone. Take a moment to look at the lighting in here. You'd think, given the importance of the work, that they'd have bright, clean lamps. But this is the 12th century, and light is a luxury item. Brother Thomas is working by the light of a tallow candle. It's sitting in a little iron spike holder near his inkwell. If you lean in and take a gentle sniff, don't get too close. You don't want to singe your nose. You'll catch the scent. It doesn't smell like vanilla or lavender. It smells like rendering fat. It smells like a kitchen accident. Tallow is made from animal fat, usually sheep or cows, and it burns with a smoky, sputtering yellow flame that gives everything in the room a jaundiced, surreal quality. It's a greasy light. It coats the walls in soot. It coats Brother Thomas's lungs in soot, too. Spending a lifetime in a scriptorium was arguably a respiratory hazard. But that flickering, uncertain light is all he has. He has to chase the light across the page, moving the candle closer as his eyesight inevitably starts to fail him. After decades of squinting at Latin grammar in the dark, you notice he stops writing to warm his hands. This is a constant battle. There is no central heating here, and monasteries were often built with high stone ceilings that were excellent for acoustics and terrible for heat retention. The ink freezes in the winter, literally freezes in the horn. Thomas has a small heated stone near his feet, but it's fighting a losing battle against the February chills seeping through the floor. He rubs his knuckles, blowing warm air into his cupped hands. There's an old marginal note found in a real manuscript from this era, where a monk wrote, "Thank God it will soon be dark," not because he was tired of praying, but because he was tired of his fingers feeling like icicles. It's a reminder that the beautiful calligraphy we see in museums was often produced by physically miserable men. The elegance of the loop on a capital L is directly proportional to how much the scribe wanted to finish the page and go find a fire. He picks up the quill again. The brief break is over. He dips the nib. The rhythm resumes. Scritch, dip, scritch. It's the heartbeat of the room. You watch the black ink flow out, glossy and wet, transforming from a liquid into a permanent record of human longing. It's strange to think that this cold, smoky, uncomfortable room is the birthplace of romance. Let's look at what sits right next to the parchment on Brother Thomas's desk. It's a rectangular object, framed in wood, filled with dark beeswax. This is a wax tablet. It's the medieval iPad. It's the scratch pad, the rough draft, the place where mistakes are allowed to happen. Before any ink touches the expensive sheepskin, the words live here first. You can see the faint, ghostly impressions of previous letters in the wax, smoothed over with the flat end of a stylus. This tablet is a palimpsest of the town's secrets. A grocery list one day, a prayer the next, and now a draft of a desperate plea for affection. Thomas glances at the tablet. The notes there are scribbled in a hasty, ugly shorthand. The client, let's imagine he was a burly, red-faced merchant wanting to impress a noble woman, didn't dictate the flowery prose Thomas is writing now. The merchant probably just grunted the main points. Tell her I have 3 ships coming in from Genoa. Tell her I'm rich. Tell her I'm not as old as I look. Thomas's job is to take those crude commercial facts and spin them into gold. He is a translator, not of language, but of class. He looks at the note about the 3 ships, and on the parchment he writes, "My fortune swells like the tide, bringing treasures to lay at your feet." See what he did there? He kept the core data, but applied a layer of a gothic Instagram filter over it. He smooths the edges. He ignores the reality of the merchant, who probably smells like salted fish and garlic, and constructs a paper version of the man that is dashing, articulate, and poetic. This is the great deception of the love letter. The recipient The noble woman reading this, or having it read to her, isn't falling in love with the merchant. She's falling in love with Brother Thomas's vocabulary. She's swooning over the penmanship of a man who has sworn off women entirely. It's a bit of a Cyrano de Bergerac situation, but on an industrial scale. You watch Thomas smooth out a patch of wax on the tablet with his thumb. He's preparing for the next sentence. He needs a rhyme for desire. He pauses, staring into the middle distance, his eyes glazed over. He's mentally scrolling through his internal dictionary. Fire, pyre, mire. He shakes his head slightly. Too easy. He decides to avoid the rhyme scheme altogether and go for alliteration. The dangerous depths of my devotion, he mutters under his breath, testing the sound of the words. He nods. That works. It sounds expensive. It sounds like something a knight would say in a song. He transfers it to the parchment, the quill snapping softly as he makes the sharp downstroke of the dead. The lie becomes truth as soon as the ink dries. You watch Brother Thomas pause again. He drops the quill into the shallow groove of his wooden desk with a soft clatter that sounds surprisingly loud in the quiet room. He presses the heel of his hand into his eye socket, rubbing circles there, then stretches his fingers. There's a soft popping sound, the knuckles of a holy man cracking just like yours do after a long day at a keyboard. Writing is hard work. We tend to think of it as intellectual labor, something that happens in the mind, but for a medieval scribe, it is a full-body endurance sport. There is a famous riddle from this era that describes the act of writing. 3 fingers hold the pen, but the whole body toils, and looking at Thomas, you can believe it. His back is aching. His eyes are straining against the flickering, low-lumen light of the tallow fat. His legs are frozen because the heat from the fire doesn't reach the floor. He picks up the quill again, but he doesn't dip it in the ink just yet. He stares at the margin of the page he's working on. It's a wide, creamy expanse of empty vellum, and here is where the humanity bleeds in. You lean closer, careful not to cast a shadow over his work. You see the corner of his mouth twitch. He dips the pen, but he doesn't write a word of the letter. Instead, in the far bottom corner of the page, away from the text, he starts to draw. It's not a holy image. It's not a cross or a saint. He draws a tiny detailed picture of a snail, and facing the snail, he draws a knight in full armor, looking terrified, dropping his sword. It's a joke, a meme, essentially, from the 12th century. Monks were famous for this marginalia. If you look through old manuscripts, you find these little doodles everywhere. Rabbits punching dogs, nuns riding on the backs of flying fish, strange, hybrid creatures playing trumpets with their noses. It's the boredom escaping. It's the mind wandering. Thomas adds a little shading to the snail's shell. For a moment, the severity of his face softens. He isn't the voice of God right now, and he isn't the ghostwriter for a merchant. He's just a bored guy at work, killing time, making a little nonsensical art in the margins of a very serious document. He admires the snail, blows on the wet ink to dry it, and then his face snaps back into that neutral, stony expression. He dips the pen back to work. But where do the words actually come from? You watch him start a new paragraph. This one is richer, more flowery. He writes about the wounds of Cupid and the sweet sickness of desire. It's a valid question. How does a man who has lived inside these stone walls since he was a boy know about the sweet sickness of desire? Has Thomas ever been in love? Maybe before he took his vows. Or maybe he's in love right now with the baker's daughter he saw delivering bread to the Abbey gates last Easter. Or more likely, he is simply copying from the best. You glance at the shelf of books chained to the lectern behind him. These are the monastery's reference materials. Among the Bibles and the commentaries on the Psalms, there is likely a copy of Ovid. Yes, that Ovid, the Roman poet who was exiled for writing poems that were a little too spicy for Emperor Augustus. In a delicious twist of historical irony, the medieval church, the bastion of morality, was the primary guardian of Ovid's Ars Amatoria, the art of love. They kept it safe. They copied it. They used it to teach Latin grammar. So when Brother Thomas needs to tell a woman she is beautiful, he doesn't look into his own heart. He mentally flips through the pages of a pagan Roman playboy who died 1,000 years ago. He is channeling Ovid. He is remixing the classics. He writes, "I can neither live with you nor without you." He pauses. That's a good line. It's actually a direct rip-off from Ovid's Amores, but the Lady Matilda won't know that. She'll just think the merchant is incredibly deep and conflicted. Thomas creates a mashup of scripture and seduction. He uses the same Latin vocabulary he uses to praise God, to praise a woman's ankles. The words adoro, diligo, caritas, they are slippery. They slide between the sacred and the secular without changing their spelling. It's quiet again. The only sound is the scratch, scratch, scratch. Now that the ink is dry, Brother Thomas has one final crucial task to perform. He has to secure the message. You have to remember, envelopes haven't been invented yet. You couldn't just slide the parchment into a paper pocket and lick the flap. The letter was its own envelope. You watch as he picks up a small, sharp knife again. He isn't sharpening his quill this time. He makes a few precise, calculated slits in the bottom of the parchment. It looks destructive, like he's ruining the work he just spent an hour on. But watch his hands. He begins to fold the sheepskin. It's a complex series of movements, like medieval origami. He folds the bottom up, the sides in, tucking the corners into the slits he just cut. This is a practice called letter locking. It's an ancient form of encryption. If someone tries to open this letter without knowing the specific sequence of unfolds, or if they tear the tab, the recipient will know it's been tampered with. It's the 12th century version of that little read receipt or the end-to-end encryption notification on your phone, but made of dead skin and geometry. Thomas reaches for a stick of sealing wax. It's a dark, rich red, colored with vermilion. He holds it over the flame of his tallow candle. The wax doesn't melt immediately. It softens, sweating beads of liquid resin. A new smell fills the small space, sharp, piney and chemical, cutting through the scent of old sweat and damp wool. He waits until a heavy, molten globule is ready to fall, and then, drip. It hits the junction of the parchment folds with a satisfying wet splat. While the wax is still hot, he picks up the matrix, the seal. Since this is a letter for a client, he isn't using the monastery's official seal, which would imply the abbot approves of this romantic rendezvous. Instead, he uses a generic seal he keeps for these freelance gigs. It has a vague image on it, maybe a bird or a fleur de lis, nothing incriminatory. He presses the metal into the soft wax. The letter is done. Thomas slides it to the edge of the desk. He doesn't look at it with pride. He looks at it the way a carpenter looks at a finished chair leg. Inspected, adequate, complete. He rubs his eyes again, his fingers leaving smudges of soot on his temples. Suddenly, the heavy oak door you walked through earlier creaks open. The sound is startling. In the library's silence, a draft of properly cold air. Night air, smelling of rain and mud, rushes in, making every candle in the room dance frantically. A figure steps inside. It's not a monk, it's a messenger. He looks like he walked out of a different genre of movie entirely, while the monks are clean-shaven and robed. This guy is rough. He's wearing a dripping wet cloak made of coarse wool, and his boots are caked in the thick, grey mud of the road. He brings the chaotic, messy world outside into this sanctuary of order He walks over to Thomas's desk. No words are exchanged. This is a familiar handover. Thomas pushes the folded parchment toward him. The messenger grabs it with a hand that is calloused and dirty, shoving the delicate love letter into a leather pouch at his belt, right next to a hunk of cheese and maybe a dagger. This is the send button. Once that messenger walks out the door, the letter enters the wild variable of the medieval world. There is no tracking number. There is no cloud backup. That piece of sheepskin has to survive rainstorms, river crossings, bandits, and the messenger's own potential incompetence. It travels at the speed of a walking horse, or perhaps just a walking man. If Lady Matilda lives in the next town over, she might get it tomorrow. If she lives in Paris, she might get it next month, or never. The squire who paid for this letter has to just sit and wait, staring at the horizon, wondering if he's been ghosted, or if the messenger just got eaten by a bear in the Ardennes. Thomas watches the messenger leave. The door thuds shut. The draft dies down. The candles settle back into their steady, upright burn. Thomas sighs, reaches for his knife, and begins to scrape the previous writing off a new patch of parchment to prepare for the next client. The network is open. The signal is strong, and he has a lot more lies to write before mate ends. You linger by the desk, watching Brother Thomas organize his workspace. He opens a small wooden box tucked discreetly behind the inkwell. It's not a collection plate. It's a lockbox. He drops a few silver pennies inside. Clink. The sound is sharp and distinctly secular. It brings up a good point. Why is a man of God running a side hustle as a romance novelist? The answer, as it usually is in history, is overhead. Look around the room again. Really, look at it. Fixing a cathedral roof costs a fortune. And then there are the candles, thousands of them burned every year. The parchment alone, for one Bible, requires the skins of hundreds of sheep. Holiness is expensive. So, the monastery isn't just a prayer factory, it's a corporation, and Brother Thomas is one of its most valuable assets. He has a skill that is rare and in high demand. He is a software engineer in a world where almost everyone else is hardware. You watch him tally something on a scrap of wax. He's meticulous. He's not keeping this money for himself. Monks don't have personal bank accounts. This goes into the general fund. It will buy winter cloaks for the novices, or salted fish for Lent, or perhaps a nice new stained glass window that depicts a saint looking very pious, paid for by the desperate flirtations of the local gentry. There is a wonderful dry humor in this ecosystem. The church condemns lust as a sin, yet it is financing its operations by facilitating it. Brother Thomas is effectively tapping the romantic desperation of the county. Every time a knight falls in love, the abbey gets a new barrel of wine. It's a sustainable business model, really, because if there is one thing you can count on in the Middle Ages, it's that people will continue to make bad decisions in the name of love, and they will need someone to write it down for them. Let's follow the ghost of that letter we just saw leave the room. Imagine it arriving at its destination. This brings us to the most awkward part of medieval romance, the user interface. In our world, a text message is a private vibration in your pocket. You look at it, you smile, you type back. It happens inside a bubble of privacy. But in the 12th century, privacy was a concept that hadn't really been invented yet. Let's say the letter reaches Lady Matilda. The messenger arrives, muddy and tired, and hands over the sealed packet. Matilda is thrilled. She recognizes the seal. Her heart beats a little faster. She runs to her solar, the private room for the ladies of the house. She breaks the wax seal, unfolding the complex origami Thomas created. She stares at the black spiky letters marching across the page, and she realizes she has absolutely no idea what it says. She can't read. She might know her alphabet, maybe a few prayers in Latin, but this is high-level courtly script. It's encrypted by her own lack of education. So what does she have to do? She has to call in tech support. She has to summon her own chaplain. Usually, an older priest who lives in the castle, a man who probably tutored her brothers and has known her since she was a baby. Imagine the scene. You have the Lady Matilda sitting on a bench, flushed with anticipation, and standing next to her is Father John, putting on his spectacles, squinting at the parchment. He clears his throat. "Ahem," he says. It says, "My heart is a burning ember in the ash of your absence." He reads it in a flat, monotone voice. He reads the spicy parts. He reads the parts about her bosom and her eyes like stars. He is the buffer. The romantic tension is filtered through the raspy voice of a 70-year-old cleric who would rather be eating lunch. It kills the mood a little, doesn't it? But this was the reality. Love was a team sport. It involved the writer, Thomas, the carrier, the muddy messenger, and the reader, the chaplain. A romantic sentiment had to pass through 3 different men before it actually landed in the mind of the woman it was intended for. It's a miracle anyone ever managed to get married at all. The silence in the scriptorium is suddenly shattered. It's not a loud noise, but in the deep quiet of the night, it feels like a physical blow. A bell begins to toll. It's the bell for Mattings. It's midnight. You watch Brother Thomas's reaction. He doesn't jump. He doesn't look startled. He simply stops mid-letter. The quill hovers over the parchment for a fraction of a second. Then he deliberately sets it down. He caps the inkhorn. He wipes his hands on a rag. The workday, or rather the work night, is paused. There is a profound discipline in this movement. He was in the middle of a sentence, perhaps describing the unendurable pain of separation, but the bell demands obedience. God does not care about your deadline, and he certainly doesn't care about the squire's romantic emergency. You watch as the room transforms. The 30 hunched figures straighten up in unison. There is a symphony of cracking joints, knees, backs, necks. The sound of 30 wool robes rustling at once sounds like a sudden gust of wind through dry leaves. They form a line. There is no chatting, no, "How's it going, Thomas?" or "Did you finish that invoice?" The rule of Saint Benedict demands silence during the night hours. You follow them out of the scriptorium. The air in the corridor is significantly colder now. You can see your own breath puffing out in white clouds. They walk in a slow, rhythmic procession toward the chapel. The stone floor is brutal on the feet, even through sandals. As you walk beside Thomas, you have to wonder what is going through his mind. He has just spent 4 hours inhabiting the headspace of a desperate lover. He has been swimming in adjectives of passion, heat, and desire, and now he has to pivot instantly to chanting the Psalms in a cold stone church. It's a strange mental whiplash. But does the romance linger? Does he kneel in the choir stall and find himself accidentally praying to the radiant Lady Matilda instead of the Virgin Mary? Or is he so professional, so detached, that the love letters are just noise to him, no different than the inventory of grain sacks? He takes his place in the choir stall. The candlelight here is sparse, creating long, dancing shadows that stretch up into the vaulted ceiling. He opens his mouth and begins to chant. The sound is low, droning, and hypnotic. It vibrates in your chest. It's a sound designed to induce a trance, to wash away the worldly concerns of the day. The squire, the merchant, the lady, they all fade away, replaced by the ancient, repetitive rhythm of the liturgy. While the monks are chanting, let's slip back into the empty scriptorium and take a look at the cheat codes Brother Thomas was using. Because let's be honest, nobody is that creative at midnight on a Tuesday. On the shelf above Thomas's desk, there is a thick, heavy book bound in pigskin. It's chained to the wood, so nobody walks off with it. This is a formulary. If you were to open it carefully, the pages are stiff. You would find it's essentially a book of templates. It's Mad Libs for the medieval soul. These books contained pre-written letters for every conceivable social situation. There was a template for a son asking a father for money. There was a template for a bishop scolding, a priest for drinking too much, and of course, there were templates for a gentleman wooing a lady. You flip through the pages, you see fill in the blank sections. I insert name. Strictly beg you, insert name, to consider my plight. It's hilarious to think about, isn't it? We like to imagine that historical romance was this raw, organic outpouring of emotion. We imagine a knight sitting by a campfire, looking at the moon, composing a sonnet from the depths of his soul. In reality, he probably went to a monk like Thomas, who pulled a book off the shelf, found template 4b, declaration of love to a superior, and just filled in the blanks. It standardized human emotion. It meant that a letter written in England sounded exactly like a letter written in France or Italy, because they were all using the same textbooks. It created a corporate speak for love, but there is a comfort in that too. If you were a tongue-tied young man who didn't know how to express himself, these monks provided a safety net. They gave you the words. They gave you a script. They allowed you to be a better version of yourself on paper. Thomas would memorize these templates years ago. He can mix and match them. He can take the opening from a letter to a duke and splice it with the closing of a letter to a long-lost friend, creating a Frankenstein's monster of affection. That sounds perfectly smooth to the untrained ear. The chanting in the chapel continues. A low rumble in the distance. The scriptorium is still. The tools of the trade, the knife, the quill, the wax, the template book, sit waiting. They are the machinery of connection. In a world of mud and plague and silence, this room is the only place where people can truly speak their minds, even if they have to use someone else's words to do it. While the monks are away chanting, Let's take a closer look at a stack of parchment sitting in the corner of the room. It looks a bit grimy, a bit thicker than the pristine sheets on Thomas's desk. This is the recycling bin, medieval style. You have to understand that in the 12th century, writing material was worth more than the words written on it. A single book could cost as much as a vineyard, so you didn't just crumple up a page and toss it if you made a mistake, or if the text became outdated. You hit the format button, but the format button was a knife and a pumice stone. Pick up a sheet from that stack. If you hold it up to the candlelight just right, you can see faint, ghostly brown lines running perpendicular to the current text. This is a palimpsest. It's a page that has been written on, scraped clean, and written on again. It's a fascinating concept to wrap your head around as you drift off. Imagine if your hard drive didn't just overwrite data, but physically buried it under new layers. On this single sheet of sheepskin, there might be 3 different realities stacked on top of each other. The bottom layer, the faint shadow, might be a boring inventory of beans from the year 10. The middle layer, scraped away, but still haunting the grain, might be a sermon about the evils of greed. And the top layer, the fresh ink, that could be the steamy love letter Thomas just finished. There is a profound accidental poetry in this. The sacred and the profane are literally sharing the same skin. A prayer is scrubbed out to make room for a romance. A romance is scrubbed out to make room for a receipt. If Brother Thomas makes a typo, say he writes eternal live instead of eternal love, he can't just hit backspace. He has to wait for the ink to dry, then take his sharpest knife and gently, surgically, scrape the top layer of the parchment off until the letter disappears. Then he has to take a boar's tooth, yes, a tooth or a smooth stone, and burnish the rough spot until it's shiny again, so it can take fresh ink. It's a violent form of editing. It leaves a scar on the page. If you run your finger over a medieval manuscript, you can sometimes feel the divots where a scribe fixed a spelling error 800 years ago. It's a tactile record of human fallibility. The knight eventually surrenders. It doesn't happen quickly. It's a slow, grey leaking of light through the narrow slit windows of the scriptorium. The heavy, suffocating darkness lifts, revealing the dust motes dancing in shafts of pale morning sun. The bell tolls again. This time, it's for prime, the first hour of the day, usually around 6 a.m. The chanting has stopped. The silence of the night is replaced by the low hum of the monastery waking up. You hear the distant clatter of wooden buckets, the bleating of sheep being moved to pasture, the heavy thud of the abbey gates being unbarred. Brother Thomas is back at his desk. He looks tired. His eyes have that red-rimmed, sandy feeling you get when you've been awake too long. He's had a small meal, probably a chunk of dark bread and some watered-down ale. Coffee won't arrive in Europe for another 500 years, so he is powering through this morning on carbohydrates and prayer. And now, the real work begins. The office hours are open. You watch as the door to the locutorium opens. A small queue has formed. It's a slice of medieval life, waiting in line. First up is a widow. She looks anxious, clutching a shawl tight around her shoulders. She doesn't want a love letter. She needs a petition written to the local bishop regarding a dispute over her late husband's will. Thomas listens. He shifts gears instantly. The flowery, romantic language of the night is gone. He engages his legal brain. He nods, asks for dates, and asks for names. He pulls a fresh sheet of parchment, a cheaper cut, maybe from the neck of the sheep, slightly wrinkled, and begins to draft a formal legal complaint. To the most reverend Father in God, he writes. His hand moves differently now. The letters are more compressed, more businesslike. He is no longer Cupid's assistant. He is a lawyer. You realize that Thomas is the most powerful person in this woman's life right now. She has no voice in the legal system unless he lends her his hand. If he phrases this petition poorly, she loses her home. If he writes it well, she survives. The weight of that responsibility must be heavy. But Thomas just looks like a guy trying to get through a stack of paperwork. He dips the pen, he scratches his nose, he writes the words that will decide her future, and then he looks up and says, "Next." The queue continues. The widow leaves with her legal lifeline, clutching the parchment to her chest, as if it were a shield. The next client steps up to the wooden barrier. It's a knight. Now pause for a second, and reset your mental image of a knight. Erase the shiny, polished chrome armor you see in movies. Erase the clean, flowing red cape. This man, standing in front of Brother Thomas, looks like he's been tumbled in a dryer full of gravel. He smells of wet horse, old iron, and unwashed linen. His tunic is stained with rust and grease. He has a scar running through his eyebrow that makes him look perpetually skeptical. He doesn't look like a poet. He looks like a bouncer. He leans against the desk, the chainmail under his tunic making a heavy chink sound against the wood. He looks uncomfortable. Being here, in this quiet room full of books and fragile men, clearly stresses him out more than a battlefield would. He clears his throat, a sound like grinding stones. "I need a letter," he rumbles, "for the Lady Isabel." Brother Thomas doesn't look up. He just dips his pen. "The usual, Sir Robert, or has the sentiment changed?" "The usual," the knight grunts, "but make it sound more sad. Tell her I am dying of grief. Tell her I can't eat. Tell her my sword is heavy in my hand because my heart is heavy in my chest." He says this with a completely straight face, while chewing on a piece of dried meat he pulled from his belt. You watch Thomas work his magic. He takes this rough grunted instruction and begins to weave a tapestry of melancholy. He writes, "My soul is an anchor dragged along the seabed of despair." The knight nods approvingly as he watches the ink flow, even though he can't read a word of it. He trusts that Thomas is making him sound sensitive. This is the great service the monks provided. They allowed violent men to cosplay as sensitive intellectuals. They created a persona for these warriors that was soft, vulnerable, and articulate. Everything the knight actually wasn't. It's a bit of a catfishing scheme, really. If Lady Isabel ever meets Sir Robert and expects him to recite poetry about anchors and seabeds, she is going to be sorely disappointed. She's going to get a guy who mostly talks about hunting dogs and sword sharpness. But for now, on the page, he is a tragic hero. Thomas finishes the letter, sands it, and takes the knight's coin. The knight clanks away, feeling very proud of his emotional depth. The sun is higher now, casting beams of light that make the dust in the air look like suspended gold dust. The air looked like suspended gold dust. The room is warming up, just barely. The smell of the tallow candles is being replaced by the smell of the day. Dust, bodies, and the faint, sweet scent of beeswax from the polishing cloth Thomas uses to clean his desk. You lean back against the pillar. It's interesting to think about the motivation behind all this writing. We've been calling them love letters, but that's a modern label we're pasting onto a medieval reality. In the 12th century, love was rarely just about feelings. It was about logistics. Listen to the next request. A merchant steps up. He wants a letter sent to a prospective bride in a neighboring city. But listen to what he asks Thomas to include. Mention the warehouse, the merchant says, tapping his finger on the desk. Make sure you tell her father about the new warehouse I built by the river and the shipment of wool from Flanders. And mention that my uncle is the alderman. Thomas nods. He knows the drill. He starts writing. But he doesn't write, "Check out my assets." He writes, "My prosperity flourishes like a garden in spring, ready to shelter you from the winter winds." He translates the assets into metaphors. The warehouse becomes security. The wool shipment becomes comfort. The uncle, who is an alderman, becomes noble lineage. It's a merger and acquisition, disguised as a romance novel. You realize that Brother Thomas isn't just a scribe. He's a spin doctor. He's taking the dry, boring economic reality of a marriage contract and dressing it up in the costume of courtly love. The client isn't looking for a soulmate. He's looking for a business partner who can bear legitimate heirs. But you can't say that. It's too crude. So you pay a monk to wrap the transaction in the language of the divine. You make it sound like destiny rather than a consolidation of real estate. Thomas finishes the letter. He doesn't judge. He doesn't roll his eyes at the blatant materialism of it all. To him, it's all the same. Whether he's writing a prayer to save a soul or a letter to acquire a dowry, it's just ink on skin. It's just the cursus, the rhythm of the words. He hands the letter over, takes the fee, and reaches for his knife to sharpen his quill again. The tip has gone dull from all this negotiating. The bell tolls again. This time the sound is brighter, cutting through the midday haze. It's the bell for the midday meal. You watch Brother Thomas put down his quill. There is a visible sense of relief in his shoulders. He caps the inkhorn. You never leave ink open, as it dries out and dust falls in. And he wipes the tip of his pen. He stands up, his knees popping audibly. The queue of lovelorn locals will have to wait. The stomach has its own schedule. You follow the line of monks out of the scriptorium and down the cloister walk toward the refectory. The air here smells different. It smells of boiled cabbage, lentils, and wood smoke. It's the smell of institutional cooking that hasn't changed much in 1,000 years. Inside the refectory, long wooden tables are arranged in a U-shape. The monks file in and stand behind their spots. There is no scrambling for seats. Everyone has a designated place, based on seniority. Thomas stands near the middle. He waits. Prayer is mumbled. A blessing is given. And then 30 men sit down simultaneously on wooden benches. And then silence. Well, not total silence. There is the clatter of wooden spoons on wooden bowls. There is the sound of chewing, but there is no conversation. Talking while eating is strictly forbidden. Instead of chatting about their day or discussing the scandalous letters they just wrote, they listen to a single voice. Up in a small pulpit built into the wall, a designated reader is chanting from a holy book. Today, it sounds like a commentary on the book of Job. It's dry stuff. Man is born unto trouble. As the sparks fly upward, you watch Thomas eat. His meal is a bowl of pottage, a thick grey stew made of field beans and onions, and a chunk of dark, dense bread. He tears the bread slowly, dipping it into the stew to soften it. It's humble fuel. There is a profound irony sitting right here at this table. An hour ago, Thomas was writing a letter for a wealthy merchant, describing a banquet of delights and wine sweet as nectar. He was conjuring images of roasted meats and spiced sauces. And now, here he is, silently spooning bean mush into his mouth, while listening to a lecture on suffering. He doesn't seem to mind, though. He looks peaceful. Maybe the silence is a relief. After spending the morning translating the chaotic, noisy, messy desires of the outside world into structured text, the simplicity of beans and silence is a vacation. He scrapes the bowl clean. He is not allowed to leave leftovers. Since they can't speak, you might wonder how they ask for the salt or how they tell the guy next to them to stop hogging the water jug. Watch Thomas's hand. He catches the eye of the brother across the table. And he doesn't whisper, he doesn't nudge. He makes a small, precise gesture with his fingers. He mimics the grinding motion. The other monk nods and slides the salt cellar across the wood. Welcome to the secret language of the monastery, the signa loquendi, or signs of speaking. Because the vow of silence was taken so seriously, medieval monks developed a complex system of sign language to handle the logistics of daily life without breaking the rules. It wasn't a full language like ASL. It was a functional code for pass the bread or I need a book. If you watch closely, you can see a whole sub-conversation happening under the drone of the scripture reading. To ask for bread, a monk would make a circle with his thumbs and forefinger. To ask for bread, a monk would make a circle with his thumbs and forefingers, the shape of a loaf. To ask for fish, he would move his hand like a fish tail swimming in water. A room full of men who have voluntarily given up their voices, yet they are chattering away with their hands. It's a silent cacophony. But there is a darker humor to it, too. There were signs for everything. There was a sign for king, which was moving your hand like a crown on your head. There was a sign for woman. To make the sign for a woman, a monk would draw a finger across his forehead, mimicking the line of a veil or a headdress. Think about that. Thomas spends his mornings writing letters to women, writing letters about women, describing their beauty and their virtue. But in his own life, in his own home, the concept of woman is reduced to a single hand gesture, meaning the one who wears a veil. He finishes his meal. He wipes his mouth with the back of his hand. He signals for water, making a fist and lifting his thumb to his mouth. He drinks. The reader in the pulpit closes the heavy book with a thud. The meal is over. The brief respite of chewing is finished. It's time to go back to the ink, back to the parchment, back to being the voice for everyone else but himself. Back in the scriptorium, the afternoon light has shifted. It's softer now, slanting through the narrow windows at a lower angle, hitting the dust motes in a way that makes the air look thick, like syrup. The post-lunch energy slump is real. Even in the 12th century, you can see a few heads nodding further down the row of desks, chins dipping dangerously close to the inkwells before snapping back up. Brother Thomas, however, is awake. He has a special commission this afternoon. Most letters are just black ink on white skin, but sometimes a client wants to show off. Sometimes they want the premium package. You watch Thomas open a different box on his desk. Inside are small clamshells, literally shells from the beach, but they aren't holding pearls. They are holding paint. He picks up a brush. It's incredibly fine, made from the whiskers of a squirrel or the hair from the inside of a cow's ear. He dips it into one of the shells. The color inside is a startling, vibrant blue. This is ultramarine. It's made from crushed lapis lazuli, a stone that had to be imported all the way from Afghanistan. Think about that for a second. A rock was mined in a mountain range thousands of miles away, carried by donkey, by boat, by camel, across deserts and seas, just so a local baron can have a really nice capital L at the start of his letter. Thomas is illuminating the first letter of the greeting. He isn't just writing, he is painting. He hunches low, holding his breath to keep his hand steady. He applies the blue paste. It sits on the vellum like a jewel. Then he reaches for a small scrap of gold leaf. It's so thin it would disintegrate if you sneezed on it. He breathes gently on the page. The moisture of his breath is just enough to make the binding agent sticky, and lays the gold down. He takes a polished dog's tooth, a standard tool for this, and rubs the gold until it shines. Scritch, rub, scritch. It's a strange contrast, isn't it? Here is a man sworn to poverty, wearing a scratchy wool robe that probably smells like wet dog, and he is manipulating materials that are worth more than his entire monastery. He is creating luxury. He is the conduit for wealth, but he gets to keep none of it. He applies the gold, watches it catch the light, and checks the drying time. To him, the gold isn't money. It's just a headache. It's just another material that is hard to work with and easy to mess up. As the afternoon wears on, the nature of the letters changes. You've seen the legal petitions, the business mergers disguised as romance, and the high-end illuminated manuscripts. But now, Thomas pulls a smaller, scrappier piece of parchment from his stack. This is for the confidential file. You realize, standing there in the quiet, that Brother Thomas knows everything. He is the medieval equivalent of the NSA, or perhaps the town gossip, but with a security clearance. Think about the web of information inside his head. Last week, he wrote a letter for the miller, professing his undying love for the baker's wife. Yesterday, he wrote a letter to the baker, asking about the price of grain in the next town over. And today, he might be writing a letter for the baker's wife, sending a subtle signal to the miller. He sits at the center of this triangle. He knows who is cheating. He knows who is broke. He knows who is lying about their lineage. He knows which knight is actually terrified of horses, and which merchant is leveraging assets he doesn't actually own. The entire social structure of the county passes through the tip of his quill, and yet, look at his face. It is completely impassive. He doesn't smirk. He doesn't raise an eyebrow. He is the Switzerland of secrets. He maintains absolute neutrality. If he were to start talking, if he were to break the seal of the confessional desk, he could destroy marriages, ruin businesses, and probably start a small war. But he doesn't. He just cares about the grammar. He is correcting the baker's wife's syntax. He is making sure her illicit affair is grammatically coherent. There is a profound professional detachment here. To Thomas, the sin isn't the adultery. The sin would be a misplaced comma. He finishes the note, seals it with a plain, unmarked blob of wax, and tosses it onto the done pile. It's just another unit of work, another human complication filed away, processed and forgotten. He dips his pen again, ready for the next secret to walk through the door. The sun has begun its long, slow descent behind the western wall of the abbey. The light in the scriptorium changes again, shifting from the bright, direct gold of midday to a heavy, bruised purple. The shadows stretch out from the pillars, long and thin, creeping across the stone floor, like the hands of a clock. You watch Brother Thomas adjust his grip on the quill. If you look closely at his hand, you can see the physical toll of the day. His fingers are stained with ink, yes, but they are also locked into a permanent claw. In the Middle Ages, they didn't hold a pen the way we do. They didn't rest the shaft against the webbing of the thumb. They pinched it hard. They held it almost vertical to the page. It required a constant isometric tension. There is no ergonomic support here. There is just bone pressing against wood, pressing against skin. Thomas drops the pen for a moment and shakes his hand out. You can almost feel the phantom ache in your own wrist just watching him. He massages the fleshy part of his thumb. He rotates his neck, and you hear the dry crunch of cartilage. It's dangerous work, writing when you're tired. This is when the accidents happen. You watch him dip the pen for a new sentence. He is writing a letter for a local landowner who wants to apologize to his wife for a misunderstanding involving a cask of wine. Thomas is tired. His focus drifts for a fraction of a second. Maybe he's thinking about the beans he ate for lunch. Maybe he's thinking about the cold draft on his ankles. And then it happens. A drop of ink falls from the quill before it hits the page. Splat. It lands right in the middle of the word faithful. It obliterates the letters. It turns a declaration of fidelity into a black Rorschach test. Thomas stares at the blot. He doesn't swear. He can't. But he closes his eyes and lets out a long, silent exhale through his nose. The frustration is palpable. That blot means he has to stop. He has to get the knife. He has to scrape. He has to repair the damage. It's a reminder that in this analog world, there is no undo command. Every error is a physical object that has to be destroyed. But here is the strange part. Brother Thomas doesn't just blame his own fatigue for the blot. He blames something else. If you could see inside his mind right now, you wouldn't find a scientific explanation for gravity and fluid dynamics. You would find a demon. Specifically a demon named Titavillus. This isn't a joke. In the medieval monastic tradition, Titavillus was a very real, very specific demon whose entire job was to mess with scribes. He was the patron saint of typos, if you will. His task was to wander through monasteries, collecting all the dropped syllables, the skipped words, and the mumbled prayers into a giant sack. Every time Thomas misspells a word, Titavillus grabs it. Every time he skips a line, Titavillus adds it to the bag. Every time a blob of ink ruins a page, that's Titavillus nudging his elbow. According to the law, when a monk died, Titavillus would show up at the gates of heaven with his sack full of errors and say, "Look at all the words this guy stole from God." It sounds funny to us, a daemon obsessed with copy editing. But for Thomas, it's a genuine source of anxiety. It adds a supernatural weight to his boredom. He isn't just fighting cramps and bad lighting. He is fighting a spiritual war against an invisible creature who wants him to use the wrong form of their... So when Thomas scrapes away that ink blot, he isn't just fixing a letter. He is erasing evidence. He is trying to cheat the daemon. He blows the dust of the scraped parchment off the desk, watching it settle on the floor, and crosses himself quickly, just in case. He dips the pen again. He writes the word faithful a second time. He writes it slowly, deliberately, staring at the ink as it flows, daring the daemon to interfere. The word dries perfectly and is black. Thomas wins this round. The light is failing now. The sun has dipped below the horizon, and the scriptorium is washed in the blue-grey twilight of early evening. This is the deadline, in its most literal sense. You can't write when you can't see, and the abbot is stingy with the candles. Brother Thomas is racing against the fading light. He is finishing the final flourishes on a document, his hand moving with the muscle memory of a man who has written 10,000 words this week. He isn't checking for demons anymore. He's just trying to get to the period. He reaches the bottom of the page. He's done. Now, look closely at what he does next. In a formal book, this would be the place for a colophon, a little note at the end of a manuscript, where the scribe speaks directly to the reader. It's the about the author section, but usually much crankier. If you read real medieval manuscripts, you find scribes complaining bitterly in these margins. They write things like, "The hand stops, but the spirit rejoices," or "Now I've written the whole thing. For Christ's sake, give me a drink." One famous colophon simply says, Writing is excessive drudgery. It crooks your back. It dims your sight. It twists your stomach and your sides. Thomas doesn't write that on the client's letter. The merchant wouldn't appreciate it, but you can see it in his posture. He rolls his shoulders. He stretches his neck. He looks at the stack of finished letters, a pile of sheepskin that holds the hopes, lies, and legal threats of the entire village. He feels a strange satisfaction. It's the same feeling you get when you close all the tabs in your browser at the end of a long workday. The mental clutter is gone. The words are out of his head and onto the page. He is no longer responsible for the night sadness or the widow's lawsuit. He has exported the data. He picks up his penknife one last time, not to cut, but to scrape a bit of dried ink off his thumb. The work is finished. The bell tolls again. Vespers, the evening prayer, is the signal that the business day is officially over. The sound of the bell seems to unlock the room. The tension that held the 30 men in their hunched positions suddenly evaporates. They stand up. The sound of wooden stools scraping against stone echoes through the vaulted ceiling. You watch the shutdown ritual. It's methodical. Thomas cleans his quill, wiping the nib on a piece of woolen cloth until no black ink remains to corrode the tip. He caps the inkhorn tight. He takes the finished letters and places them in a wooden cubbyhole, a sort of medieval outbox, ready for the messengers who will come at first light. Then the candle, one by one, the flames are snuffed out. Puff, 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 puff. With each extinguished flame, the smell of acrid smoke fills the air, mixing with the smell of the cooling wax. The room plunges into shadow, illuminated only by the faint, residual light coming from the hallway. The scriptorium, which was a bustling factory of human emotion just minutes ago, becomes a tomb of silence. The desks stand in empty rows, looking like skeletons. The words are locked away in the dark. Thomas pulls his hood up over his head. He tucks his hands into his opposite sleeves to keep them warm. He steps away from the desk, leaving the snail doodle and the Ovid quotes behind him in the dark. He is no longer the ghostwriter. He is no longer the lawyer. He is just Brother Thomas again, a tired man walking toward the sound of chanting. You follow him out. The heavy oak door swings shut with a final, resonant thud. The latch falls. The secrets are sealed in for the night. The server has been powered down. You walk with Brother Thomas down the cloister. This is the medieval version of the evening commute. There is no traffic, no red lights, just the rhythmic swish-swish of wool robes brushing against stone, and the soft slap of leather sandals. The cloister is an open square of grass, surrounded by a covered walkway. It's pitch black out here now. The only light comes from the stars, which look impossibly bright and sharp without any city glow to wash them out. You look up and see the same constellations Thomas sees. He probably knows them by their Latin names, using them to tell the time, or the season, or when to plant the peas. The air smells of rain and wet boxwood. It's a clean, sharp smell that scrubs the scent of old ink and melting wax out of your nose. As you walk, you wonder if Thomas can turn his brain off. Can he just stop thinking about the burning embers of desire he wrote about an hour ago? Or do the phrases stick in his head like catchy song lyrics? Does he find himself humming a line about a dowry while he's trying to meditate? It's the universal struggle of the freelancer. He has spent the day inhabiting other people's lives, fixing their problems, smoothing over their anxieties. Now, walking in the dark, he has to reclaim his own headspace. He pulls his hands deeper into his sleeves. The cold is biting now, a reminder that the comforts of the body are fleeting, which is a very appropriate thought for a monk, but also just an annoying reality of living in a stone building with no insulation. He passes a statue of a saint in a niche. He doesn't look at it. He's seen it every day for 40 years. He just keeps moving, one foot in front of the other, a tired man heading toward the finish line of the day. The procession flows into the chapel for the final service of the day, Compline. This is the sleepiest of all the services. It is short, quiet, and designed specifically to prepare the mind for rest. The church is almost entirely dark, lit only by a single lamp near the altar. The shadows are long and soft, You find a spot in the back. The monks file into their stalls, but they don't stand up straight and tall like they did this morning. They slump a little. They lean against the high wooden backs of the seats, known as misericords, literally acts of mercy, which had little ledges you could lean your bum on, while technically still standing. The chanting begins. It's different from the morning chant. It's lower, slower. It's a lullaby in minor key. Salva nos, domine, vigilantes, custode nos dormientes. Save us, Lord, while waking, and guard us while sleeping. It's a heavy, velvet wall of sound. You watch Thomas close his eyes. His lips move automatically. He has sung these words every night since he was a teenager. He doesn't need to think about them. The vibration of the chant rattles in his chest, loosening the tension in his shoulders, shaking the ink stains out of his soul. Then comes the most profound moment of the monastic day, the great silence. Once compline is over, and the abbot gives the final signal, all communication must cease. Completely. No talking, no whispering, no sign language, no passing notes. The monastery enters a strict, holy shutdown mode. From this moment until the bell rings for prime tomorrow morning, the world of words, the world Thomas dominates, the world of letters and petitions and arguments, is turned off. It must be a relief. Imagine if at 8,000 p.m. every night the internet just broke for everyone. No emails, no notifications, just mandatory, sacred quiet. Thomas pulls his hood all the way forward, creating a tunnel of privacy around his face. He is done with words. He is done with people. You follow Brother Thomas up the night stairs. These are wide, worn stone steps that lead directly from the church to the dormitory, or the daughter. It's a practical piece of architecture designed for men who have to get up in the middle of the night to sing. You don't want to be stumbling around in the dark, trying to find your way to work. The dormitory is a cavernous, long room running the length of the building. It isn't divided into private cubicles or cozy bedrooms. It is an open-plan sleeping warehouse. There are rows of pallets, simple wooden frames filled with straw, lined up along the walls. The temperature up here is bracing. Heat rises in theory, but in a medieval stone barn with a high timber roof, the heat mostly just gets lost in the rafters. You watch Thomas find his spot. It's halfway down the room, identified only by the familiar groove in the straw mattress, where his body has shaped the bedding over the last decade. There is no changing into pajamas here. Monks slept in their habits. It was a rule. You had to be ready for the apocalypse, or at least for the midnight bell, at a moment's notice. So Thomas sits on the edge of his bed and simply unties his leather sandals. He slides them off. The sound of the leather hitting the floorboards is the loudest thing in the room. He rubs his cold feet, wiggling toes that have been cramped up all day. He loosens the belt around his waist, the cincture, just a notch. That is the extent of his bedtime routine. No brushing teeth, maybe a rub with a cloth, and some salt if he's fastidious. No face cream, no reading a few chapters of a thriller. Just sit, shoes off, lie down. He pulls a heavy wool blanket up to his chin. It's scratchy, heavy, and smells faintly of the sheep it came from, but it traps the body heat effectively. You look down the row of beds. Other monks are doing the same. It's a synchronized settling. The rustle of straw, the sigh of wool, the creak of wood. Thomas lies on his back, staring up into the darkness of the rafters. The room is settling. The silence isn't empty. It's textured. You can hear the rhythm of 30 men breathing. It sounds like the ocean, a slow, steady tide of inhalation and exhalation. Somewhere down the line, a soft snore begins, a rhythmic, rasping saw that cuts through the quiet. But nobody wakes up to shush him. They are used to it. It's just white noise. You wonder what happens in Thomas's brain right now. Does the Tetris effect kick in? You know how, when you play a game for too long, you see the blocks falling when you close your eyes. For Thomas, it must be letters. As he drifts toward the edge of sleep, he probably sees black, spiky Gothic script floating behind his eyelids. He sees the curve of a ger, the sharp ascender of an her. He sees the faces of the people he wrote for today. The desperate squire, the greedy merchant, the sad knight. Their voices, which were so loud and demanding in the daylight, are fading now. They are being overwritten by the calm of the night. The logic of the waking world begins to dissolve. In his mind, maybe the snail from the margin of the page starts to move. Maybe the knight drops his sword and picks up a flower. The rigid rules of the scriptorium, the grammar, the spacing, the hierarchy start to bend and soften. He shifts on the straw, finding the sweet spot. His hands, the tools of his trade, are finally still. The cramp in his thumb relaxes. The ink stain on his finger is invisible in the dark. He is no longer a conduit for other people's words. He is just a body, resting on the earth, waiting for the sun. The boundary between the stone room and the dream world gets thin. The breathing in the room synchronizes. The darkness feels less like a lack of light and more like a physical weight, a soft blanket pressing down, holding everyone in place. The day is done. The record is written. The book is closed. While Brother Thomas sleeps, let's cast our minds back to that letter. The one sealed with the red wax, currently bouncing in the pouch of a messenger, riding through the pitch-black woods. It's strange to think that this fragile object is the only thing that will survive. Brother Thomas will eventually pass away. The Lady Matilda will grow old. The squire will either get the girl or he won't. And eventually, his heart will stop beating too. The stone walls of the abbey will crumble, or be pulled down to build a barn, or be bombed in a war 800 years later. The candles will burn down to nothing. The demon Titavillus will run out of work. But the sheepskin remains, because parchment is incredibly durable. That love letter might just make it. It might sit in a chest for 100 years. It might be used as a bookmark. It might be cut up to bind a different book. And then, one day, it might end up behind glass in a museum, bathed in low UV light, stared at by tourists who are checking their own digital messages. We look at those squiggly black lines, and we try to decode the feelings of the past. We read, "My heart is a burning ember," and we smile at the melodrama of it. But tonight, you know the truth. You know that the burning ember wasn't a raw confession. It was a calculated line, chosen by a tired monk who just wanted to finish his shift. Does that make the love less real? I don't think so. There is something beautiful about the fact that we have always needed help expressing ourselves. We have always needed a Brother Thomas to find the right words when our own throats go dry. We are a species that hires consultants for our hearts. And the fact that this ink, this mixture of wasp nests and iron, has outlasted the very civilization that created it, is a testament to how desperately we want to be understood. The messenger rides on. The letter survives. The signal persists in the dark. A perspective back, float up from the dormitory, up through the timber roof, and into the cool night air above the abbey. From up here, the monastery looks like a small, grey stone island in a sea of darkness. The forests around it are deep and impenetrable. The roads are just thin ribbons of mud disappearing into the gloom. There are no streetlights, no headlights, no glow from a nearby city. There is just the earth, the sky, and this tiny cluster of sleeping men. The silence is absolute now. The bell has stopped tolling. The scratching of the quills has ceased. The only movement is the slow drift of clouds across the moon and the gentle swaying of the trees in the wind. Sleep is the great equalizer. It doesn't matter that Thomas lives in the 12th century and you live in the 21st. It doesn't matter that he sleeps on straw and you sleep on memory foam. The physiology of rest is the same. His breathing slows down just like yours. His body temperature drops just like yours. His brain begins to sort through the memories of the day, filing away the blue paint and the smell of the tallow, just as your brain is filing away the traffic and the emails. For these few hours, the gap of 800 years closes completely. You are both just human beings, safe in your respective shelters, hiding from the dark, waiting for the renewal of the morning. The history book closes. The dates and the names fade away. There is only the heavy, peaceful gravity of sleep, pulling everything down into the earth. Thomas is asleep. The abbot is asleep. The messenger is asleep under a tree. And now, it is time for you to join them. The story is finished. The scriptorium is closed. The heavy oak door has been shut and bolted, sealing the quiet inside. Imagine that door in your mind now. A thick, solid wood door with iron hinges. Watch it swing shut. Hear the heavy, satisfying thud as it closes. With that sound, the noise of the world is locked out. The emails, the notifications, the to-do lists, the anxieties of the modern day, they are all on the other side of that door, out in the corridor, unable to reach you. You are safe inside the quiet. Feel the weight of your own body now. Feel the mattress rising up to support you, just as the earth supports the stone walls of the abbey. Let your shoulders drop away from your ears. Unclench your jaw. Let your hands, which have done their own work today, curl loosely at your sides. They don't need to hold a pen, a phone, or a steering wheel. They can just be still. Visualize the darkness of the room, not as a space, but as a soft, warm blanket wrapping around you. It is a protective darkness. It is the same velvet night that covered the hills of the 12th century. A night that has held millions of people in its arms, generation after generation. Your breathing is slow and steady, in out, like the tide, like the chant. There is nothing left to write. There is nothing left to explain. There is only this moment of perfect, heavy stillness. The ink is dry. The page is turned. The night is yours. Good night.